When Dr. Catherine Brennan stitched up the dying Apache warrior on her clinic table, she thought she was just doing her job. She thought she was just saving a life. What she didn't know was that the man wasn't just any Apache. He was their most feared war chief. And as the sun rose over the New Mexico desert, 300 of his warriors surrounded her tiny adobe house, their faces painted for war, their lances gleaming in the dawn light. Her single act of mercy hadn't just saved a man. It had lit the fuse on a powder keg that was about to either forge an impossible peace or unleash the bloodiest war the territory had ever seen. The desert wind was a miserable sound. It screamed through the dusty streets of Socorro like a ghost with a grudge, rattling the wooden shutters of Dr. Catherine Brennan's clinic. Inside, the heat was suffocating. Lamplight flickered as she worked over the fevered body of Maria Santos, a young mother whose baby was fighting its way into the world. "Please, doctor," Maria whispered, her grip on Catherine's wrist like iron. "Save my child." Catherine had delivered babies back in Philadelphia, dozens of them, but never like this. Never in a place where sand found its way into every sterile jar, where her supplies might run out weeks before the next wagon from Santa Fe. She'd come to this godforsaken speck on the map 6 months ago. She was running, carrying only her medical bag and a heart so broken it felt like dust. The people of Socorro didn't trust her at first. A woman doctor was strange enough, but one who treated everyone the same. White settlers, Mexican families, even the Apache who came to trade. That was practically a crime. But one broken bone, one raging fever at a time, she'd earned their reluctant respect. "Push now, Maria," Catherine urged, her hands steady. The baby arrived in a sudden messy rush, a perfect, tiny boy whose furious cries filled the small, hot room. As Catherine cleaned him, wrapping him in clean linen, she felt it, that old, familiar warmth. The reason she'd endured years of medical school, of being told she didn't belong. This was it. Life winning. "A son," she announced, placing the newborn in his mother's arms. Tears of relief streamed down Maria's face. "Gracias, doctora. You are a gift from God." Catherine just smiled, packing away her instruments. She'd heard it before, but not everyone in town agreed. Mayor Henderson had warned her just last week. Her unusual methods were causing talk. Her willingness to treat anyone was making the respectable folks nervous. As she saw Maria's husband out, she noticed dark clouds gathering on the horizon, a smudge of ink against the stars. The desert was a cruel, unpredictable place. But it was also her sanctuary. A place where she could practice medicine her way, guided by her conscience, not by society's rules. She had no way of knowing that a different kind of storm was coming. A storm that would bring her a patient whose wounds wouldn't just threaten his life, but the lives of everyone in Socorro. The wind howled louder, like a warning she couldn't yet understand. And it was a warning she should have listened to. The sound that woke her wasn't the wind. It was the thunder of hooves, coming hard and fast, shaking the very ground beneath her clinic. Catherine threw on her coat, her mind racing. A mining accident? A gunfight at the saloon? She flung open the door and her blood ran cold. It was Miguel Santos, Maria's brother-in-law. He was slumped over his horse, which was slick with sweat. But he wasn't alone. He was holding up a man who looked like he'd been pulled from a nightmare. Apache. Long black hair braided with leather. Tattoos covering his chest. And even unconscious, slumped over a horse, the man radiated a terrifying power. A born warrior. "Dr. Brennan!" Miguel cried out, his voice shaking. "You must help him!" Catherine took a step back. "Miguel, are you insane? Bringing him here, the soldiers. I found him by the river." Miguel's desperation was a physical force. He was half dead. He kept saying your name, the medicine woman who heals without asking questions. Her reputation. It had reached further than she knew. Word travels fast in the desert. The wounded man's eyes flickered open. They were sharp, dangerous, like chips of black obsidian. His English was thick with an accent, but the words were clear. You saved the Santos baby. It wasn't a question. How do you know that? Catherine found herself moving closer, every instinct screaming at her to turn and run. The desert has many ears, he rasped, before his eyes rolled back and he slumped against Miguel again. That's when she saw the wounds. 3 bullet holes. 2 in the chest, 1 in the abdomen. They weren't random shots. They were placed with cold military precision. Someone hadn't just tried to kill this man. They'd tried to execute him, and they'd almost succeeded. "Help me get him inside," she said, her oath as a doctor crushing her fear. "Quickly, before anyone sees." As they dragged the heavy warrior into her clinic, Catherine felt it. A line being crossed. A point of no return. Treating an Apache was more than dangerous. The territorial government paid good money for their scalps. Aiding one was treason. It was a death sentence. But looking at the man's face, twisted in pain, she didn't see an enemy. She saw a patient. A human being who was dying. And she was a healer. "What is your name?" she asked, cutting away his blood-soaked buckskin shirt. He whispered a single word before passing out again. A yunch. She didn't know what it meant. She didn't know he was a war chief. She didn't know that hundreds of his warriors were already tearing the desert apart, looking for him. She just knew she had to save him. Outside, the storm finally broke, and the first drops of rain began to fall. But somewhere in the distance, carried on the wind, she could have sworn she heard the faint, rhythmic beat of war drums. It had been 3 days, 3 sleepless nights, fueled by black coffee and sheer willpower. The fire in the small iron stove cast long, dancing shadows across the hidden room behind her clinic, a place no one in Sakuro even knew existed. Ayuncha's fever had finally broken an hour ago. His skin was no longer a furnace, but cool and slick with sweat. "The pain," he whispered, his voice stronger now. He tried to sit up. "It is different." Catherine dipped a cloth in cool water. "Different how?" "Like lightning," he said, watching her hands. "Not thunder." He saw how steady they were, even now with the whole world wanting them both dead. "You have strong medicine, Dr. Brennan." She paused. "It's not magic. It's knowledge." "Among my people," he said, his eyes tracking her every move as she checked his bandages, "there is no difference." The wounds were healing, impossibly fast. The edges were clean, knitting together without the angry red sign of infection. He was strong. "Knowledge without wisdom is a weapon," he said quietly. "Wisdom without courage is a shield that shatters. Which do you have?" "Both," he answered his own question. "Or you would have let me die at your door." A sudden sound from outside made them both freeze. Footsteps, heavy boots on the wooden boardwalk, the unmistakable rhythmic tread of soldiers. Catherine's heart hammered against her ribs. Voices drifted through the thin adobe walls. "Check every building, Sergeant. An Apache war chief doesn't just vanish." The voice was sharp, authoritative. "Yes, sir, Colonel Archer." Colonel Archer. The name was infamous in the territory. A man known for his brutal efficiency in dealing with the Apache problem. Catherine locked eyes with Ayunch. She saw her own terror reflected there. But she also saw something else. Trust. 3 days ago, this man was her biggest fear. Now, she realized with a sickening jolt, she was more afraid of what the soldiers would do to him. "There's a root cellar," she whispered, pointing to a trapdoor hidden under an old Navajo rug. "It connects to the old mine shafts." Ayunch shook his head. A slow, deliberate movement. Too weak to run. Too proud to hide. "Then what?" Her voice was shaking. "You could save yourself," he said, his words cutting through her panic. "Tell them I forced my way in, threatened you. They will believe it. A lone woman." He was offering her a way out, his life for hers. And in that moment, something inside her shifted, cracking open like dry desert earth. He wasn't a savage. He wasn't an enemy. He was a man of honor, willing to die to protect the person who had saved him. "I don't want to be saved from this," she said, her voice barely a whisper, but filled with a certainty that shocked them both. The footsteps were closer now, just outside her main door. She could see the bobbing light of lanterns through the cracks in the shutters. They were out of time. Ayunch reached into a small leather pouch at his waist. He pulled out a piece of polished obsidian, carved into the perfect shape of a soaring hawk. "This was my grandmother's," he said, pressing it into her palm. It was strangely warm. "She was the greatest healer our people have ever known." "Why are you giving this to me?" "Because she always said the spirits choose their own." His fingers closed briefly over hers. "And sometimes they choose from unexpected places." The voices were right outside the door now. Loud, impatient. "If we survive this," Ayunch whispered, his gaze intense, "I will tell you why those bullets were meant for me. It will change how you see everything." Before she could ask what he meant, the handle on the clinic door rattled violently. A heavy fist pounded on the wood. "Dr. Brennan, open up! U.S. Cavalry." Her sanctuary was no longer a haven. It had just become a trap. Colonel William Archer filled the doorway, his silhouette blocking the lamplight from the street. He was a man carved from granite and suspicion, his pale eyes sweeping the room, missing nothing. "Dr. Brennan." His voice was like gravel. "Forgive the intrusion. We're conducting a security sweep." Catherine forced herself to turn back to her workbench, arranging vials of medicine. The simple, mundane task was the only thing keeping her knees from buckling. The trap door was less than 15 feet away. "A security sweep?" she asked, trying to keep her voice even. "Apache raiding parties," Archer said, stepping inside. His spurs clicked on the wooden floorboards, a sound like a clock ticking down to an execution. "We have reliable intelligence that their war chief, a man they call Ayunch, was wounded. He may be seeking unauthorized medical attention." The word unauthorized was a coiled snake in the middle of the room. "I treat anyone who needs my help, Colonel," she said, her back still to him. "That's my oath." Indeed. Archer's smile was a thin, bloodless line. "Seen any strangers lately, Doctor? Anyone out of place?" Behind him, she saw Sergeant Martinez, a local man she knew from the general store. He looked profoundly uncomfortable, sweat beading on his upper lip. His eyes kept darting towards the back of the room, towards the rug. He knew, or he suspected. "Just the usual," Catherine said, finally turning to face them. "Broken bones from the mine, a few cases of fever. The frontier keeps me busy." Archer picked up one of her scalpels, testing its edge with his thumb. "Sophisticated equipment for a town like Sakuro. Where did you train again?" "Philadelphia." "Ah, yes. The city of brotherly love." He put the scalpel down and began to walk slowly toward the back of the room. Each step was a hammer blow against Catherine's chest. "Funny thing, what brings a talented doctor like you all the way out here?" It wasn't a question. It was an accusation. "I wanted to be where I was needed most." The lie felt like ash in her mouth. "How noble," Archer purred. He was getting closer to the rug. "Though I understand your departure from Philadelphia wasn't entirely voluntary. Some difficulties with your previous position, I believe?" Ice. Pure ice, flooding her veins. He knew. He knew about the scandal, the whispers, the career she'd left in ruins. "I'm not sure what you mean." "Hospital records are such fascinating things, Doctor. Especially when they involve controversial decisions, a patient who died, an experimental treatment that went wrong, a promising career that ended overnight." Sergeant Martinez shifted his weight. "Colonel, perhaps we should—" "In a moment, Sergeant," Archer snapped, his pale eyes locked on Catherine's. "You see, Doctor, we have reports of a healer with advanced medical training aiding the Apache. Someone with a history of questionable judgment." The accusation landed like a punch. Heat flared in her cheeks. "Every human life is worth saving, Colonel." "Is it?" Archer was standing right beside the rug now. He knelt, his fingers tracing the geometric pattern woven into the wool. "That's exactly what I'd expect from someone hiding a wanted murderer." The room went silent. The only sound was the frantic pounding of her own heart. In her pocket, the stone hawk felt like it was burning through the fabric of her dress. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Don't you?" Archer looked up, his smile widening. "This is a beautiful rug, Apache design if I'm not mistaken." Her mouth was desert sand. She'd never even looked at the pattern. It was just a rug. A cover. Now it was a smoking gun. "I bought it from a trader," she stammered. "I don't recall—" "Memory is a funny thing under pressure," Archer said, standing up and brushing the dust from his uniform. He gestured to the nervous sergeant. "Martinez, lift the rug." "Colonel—" Martinez hesitated. His eyes met Catherine's for a split second, and in them, she saw a flicker of something. Pity? Regret? "Now, Sergeant." As Martinez bent down, his hands reaching for the edge of the rug, time seemed to stretch and warp. This was it. It was over. Ayunch would be found. They would both be dragged out into the street. Her life, the fragile piece she had built, all of it would be destroyed. But then, from deep beneath the floorboards, came a sound. A low, soft whistle. The sound of wind moving through a narrow space. The sound of an escape route. The mine shaft. Ayunch had found the mine shaft. Before Archer could process the sound, another one split the night. A sound that froze the blood in everyone's veins. The deep, resonant boom of a war drum. Then another. And another. They weren't distant anymore. They were right outside, surrounding the town. Archer's head snapped up, his face a mask of disbelief and fury. He had walked into a trap of his own making, but the bait had just summoned a whole wolf pack. The drums began before dawn, a sound that wasn't just heard, but felt deep in your bones, shaking the adobe walls of the clinic like a slow-motion earthquake. Catherine scrambled from her cot, her heart a frantic bird against her ribs. She peered through the window and gasped. The main square of Sakura was gone. In its place were hundreds of Apache warriors on horseback. Their faces were a terrifying kaleidoscope of black and red war paint. Sunlight glinted off rifle barrels and the razor-sharp tips of their lances. They were silent, motionless, an army of ghosts that had appeared with the morning mist. At their head sat an older warrior, his hair the color of silver, his face a roadmap of old battles. Catherine ran back to the hidden room. The trapdoor was open. Ayunch was gone. For a terrifying second, she thought he'd abandoned her. Then she saw him, leaning against the far wall, struggling to stand. He'd come back from the mine shaft. "Ayunch," she whispered. "Your people." He saw the war party through the main window, and his face went pale. "That is Nietzsche," he said, his voice strained. "My uncle. He leads when I cannot." A new kind of fear entered his eyes, something she hadn't seen before. "Catherine, you must understand. I am not just a warrior." Before he could explain, a voice boomed across the plaza, speaking perfect, chilling English. "White medicine woman! You hold our war chief! Send him out, or your town turns to ash!" War chief. The word hung in the air. Catherine turned to Ayunch, her mind struggling to connect the pieces. "You're their leader?" He nodded, a grimace of pain twisting his features. "I command the 3 bands of the Chiricahua. 800 warriors follow me." He touched his side, where her stitches held his life together. "These bullets, they were not from some random skirmish. I was on my way to Santa Fe, to the peace talks." It all clicked into place. A terrifying logical puzzle. "The soldiers who shot you," she breathed. "It was an assassination. They needed you dead before you could make peace." "And now," Ayunch said, his gaze fixed on his uncle, "Nietzsche believes you are my captor. He will burn this town to the ground to get me back." Outside, Nietzsche began to count, his voice a low, menacing drumbeat. The warriors shifted, raising their weapons. The horses stamped, sensing the coming violence. Catherine's eyes fell on her medical bag. Inside, wrapped in a small cloth, was the piece of evidence that could change everything. The small brass button from a U.S. cavalry uniform. the one she had dug out of Ayunch's chest. Proof. But would anyone listen? "There is more," Ayunch said, his voice low and urgent. "The man who ordered my death, he is coming. My scouts saw his dust trail hours ago, blue uniforms, riding hard for Sakuro." "Who?" "Someone who profits from war." Ayunch gripped her arm, his fingers surprisingly strong. "Someone who sells rifles to the army and bad whiskey to my people. Someone who owns the land the railroad will build on, if the Apache are wiped out first." Colonel Archer. It had to be. A new sound reached them. A rhythmic drumming. But this was different. Sharper. More organized. The unmistakable sound of a cavalry troop at the gallop. The trap was closing. From both sides. Miguel Santos burst through her back door, his face ashen. "Doctor! It's Colonel Archer! He has 50 soldiers! He says he's here to save the town from the Apache, and arrest anyone who helped them." Caught. She was caught between an Apache army that thought she was an enemy, and a cavalry troop led by the man who wanted to kill them all. Both sides wanted Ayunch, and both saw her as a pawn to be sacrificed. She looked at the man she had risked everything to save. He was weak, wounded, but his eyes held the fire of a leader. "Can you reason with your uncle?" she asked. A faint, pained smile touched Ayunch's lips. "He taught me that a wise man listens before he strikes, but his patience is not endless." "Then we better start talking fast." Colonel Archer rode into the plaza like he owned it, his 50 cavalrymen fanning out behind him, a disciplined line of blue and steel. Sabers drawn, rifles at the ready. But the scene that met him was not the one he'd planned. It wasn't a town under siege. It was a standoff. And in the middle, standing in the no-man's land between 300 Apache warriors and 50 U.S. soldiers, was Dr. Catherine Brennan. She looked impossibly small, impossibly calm. "Dr. Brennan!" Archer's voice was a whip crack. "Step away from that savage! That is an order!" Catherine didn't move. She simply raised her hand, and in it, glinting in the morning sun, was a small brass button. "Colonel Archer," her voice was clear, steady, carrying across the silent plaza. "I believe this belongs to you. Or rather, to one of your soldiers." A murmur rippled through both armies. Naichi, the old war chief, swung down from his horse, his eyes narrowed with a new kind of interest. "I removed this button from a bullet wound in the chest of War Chief Ayunch," Catherine announced. "It was driven deep into his flesh by a rifle shot. A shot fired from a U.S. Army rifle, by a man wearing a U.S. Army uniform." Archer's face, which had been a mask of smug authority, flickered. "That proves nothing. A battlefield trinket. From an ambush." Ayunch stepped forward, and though he swayed, his voice was the voice of a commander. "Your men shot me from hiding, Colonel, as I rode alone under a flag of truce to the peace talks you arranged." "Lies!" Archer spat, but a single drop of sweat traced a path through the dust on his temple. Then, the crowd of townspeople parted. Miguel Santos stumbled forward, his hands trembling. "No lies, Colonel," he choked out. You paid me. You paid me to watch the doctora, to tell you if any Apache came to her for healing." The plaza became so quiet, you could hear the creak of saddle leather. Catherine stared at Archer, the final, ugly piece of the puzzle sliding into place. "You weren't hunting him," she said, the realization dawning on her. "You were using me. You knew he would seek help. You let him come here, planning to follow. You wanted to start a fight right here, in this town. Kill him. Kill his warriors, and blame the Apache for breaking the peace." Naichi began speaking in rapid Apache, his warriors' faces hardening into masks of cold fury. He turned back to Archer, his English dripping with contempt. "My nephew speaks the truth. The medicine woman's eyes do not lie. You do not hunt men, Blue Coat. You hunt peace. That makes you an enemy to all people." Archer's hand drifted towards the pistol on his hip, but his own men were shifting in their saddles, their expressions uneasy. This wasn't the clean, heroic battle they'd been promised. This smelled like a setup. "He's a wanted criminal," Archer shouted, his voice cracking with desperation. "Whatever this woman says, I am. Ayunch interrupted. The admission silenced everyone. I have killed soldiers in battle, he said, his voice resonating with a deep, painful honesty. I have led raids. I have brought death to those who brought death to my people. Catherine felt her heart clench. But this woman, Ayunch continued, his eyes finding hers across the dusty ground. She did not see my war paint. She saw my wounds. She saw a dying man. And she chose to heal her enemy. She risked her life, her freedom, everything she had, to save a man her people wanted dead. He reached up and pulled a simple silver pendant from around his neck, holding it aloft. My sister made this for me, the day before soldiers burned our village and killed her. She said to me, "War is the easy path, brother. Peace. Peace takes true courage." The wind swirled through the plaza, carrying the scent of rain and sagebrush. Every eye, Apache, soldier, townsfolk, was fixed on the three people standing in the center of their world. "Colonel," Catherine said, her voice quiet but firm, "you wanted to use his wounds to start a war. But you were wrong." She took a step closer to Ayunch, standing beside him. "Wounds can also be the thing that ends them." The sky rumbled, not with thunder, but with the tension of a moment balanced on the edge of a knife. The fate of two peoples, hanging in the balance. And then, the first drops of rain began to fall. Just as Archer raised his rifle, a strange thing happened. Ayunch started to laugh. It wasn't a crazed, desperate sound. It was deep and real, and it cut through the tension like a warm breeze. "Uncle," he called out to Nietzsche, his voice carrying over the nervous stamping of the horses. "Remember grandmother's story? The one about the hawk who chose to help the wounded snake?" The old chief's stony expression softened, just a fraction. The other hawks called her a fool. "And what did grandmother say?" Ayunch pressed. "She said trying to cure poison with more poison only creates a wasteland." Nietzsche's eyes moved from his nephew to Catherine, and a flicker of understanding passed between them. All around them, warriors and soldiers held their breath, weapons half raised, caught in the grip of a story they didn't know, but were beginning to understand. Ayunch held up the silver pendant his sister had made. "She told me that war is a fire that consumes everything, even the person who starts it. But peace is like planting a seed in the desert. It takes patience, it takes courage, and sometimes it takes a healer who is not afraid of the storm." Colonel Archer's face was a storm of its own. He looked from Ayunch to Catherine, to the uneasy faces of his own men. His perfect plan, his war for profit, was unraveling before his very eyes. "He's still a murderer," Archer snarled, but his voice lacked conviction. "Fancy words don't change the blood on his hands." "You're right," Ayunch said, and the admission was so unexpected it shocked Archer into silence. "I have done terrible things. My hands are not clean." His dark eyes found Catherine's again. "But this woman did not look at my hands. She looked at my wounds. She did not see a warrior. She saw a patient. She did not see an enemy. She saw a human being. Standing there, with the cool rain washing the dust from her face, Catherine finally understood. The little stone hawk in her pocket, the stories, her own broken past, it was all connected. It wasn't about armies or politics. It was about a simple, terrifying choice: to see a person's pain, or to see only the label they wore. "Colonel," she said, her voice ringing with a strength she didn't know she possessed, "you wanted to use his pain for your own gain, but pain can be a bridge, if we are brave enough to cross it." Nietzsche dismounted and walked slowly to his nephew. He placed his hands on Ayunch's shoulders, a gesture of immense significance. "The spirits guided you well," he said softly. "Then, for all to hear, we will go to the peace talks, but if we are betrayed again—" He left the threat hanging in the air. It needed no explanation. Colonel Archer looked at his soldiers. He saw no loyalty in their eyes, only doubt. He looked at the 300 Apache warriors, their faces now grimly resolute. He was a man on an island, and the tide was coming in. Slowly, deliberately, he lowered his rifle. He holstered his pistol. "This isn't over," he bit out. "No," Catherine agreed, a small smile touching her lips as she stood beside Ayanch in the falling rain. It's just beginning. As the Apache began to turn their horses, their movements controlled and dignified, and as the soldiers lowered their weapons with sighs of relief, Catherine felt a profound shift deep inside her. She wasn't the shamed doctor from Philadelphia anymore, hiding from her failures. She was the woman who had stood in the middle of a war and chosen peace, the healer who had chosen compassion over fear. In her pocket, the small stone hawk felt cool against her skin. Its work, for now, was done. 6 months later, the dust of Socorro had settled in more ways than one. Catherine stood in the doorway of her new clinic, a real building now, with glass windows and sturdy wooden floors, built by the grateful townspeople and a few surprisingly skilled Apache carpenters. Through the window, she watched a scene that would have been impossible just a year ago. Ayanch, his wounds now nothing more than thin, silver scars, was demonstrating to a group of children how to set a splint on a broken bone using yucca fibers. The children were a mix of Apache, Mexican, and white settlers, all crowded together, listening with rapt attention. The peace talks in Santa Fe had been a success. Fragile, yes, but real. For the first time in a generation, trade wagons moved freely between the settlements and the Apache strongholds. Colonel Archer had been quietly reassigned to a desk job in Washington, D.C. A promotion on paper, but everyone knew it for what it was: a quiet, humiliating exile. And Miguel Santos had used the reward money Archer had given him to expand his store, where he now served as the unofficial translator for the booming trade between the communities. But the real proof of how much the world had changed was the letter Catherine held in her hand. The paper was crisp, expensive, the letterhead from the Philadelphia Medical Board. Dr. Brennan, it read, "We have followed the news of your work in the New Mexico territory with great interest. Your efforts in brokering peace and in establishing a clinic that integrates settler and native healing practices are revolutionary. The board formally invites you to return to Philadelphia to head our new Department of Frontier Medicine." "Will you go back?" Ayanch's voice startled her. He had a way of moving that was as silent as the desert wind. She folded the letter and slipped it into her apron pocket. Outside, a young Apache girl with a newly splinted arm was laughing as she chased a butterfly with the mayor's son. The sound was pure, uncomplicated joy. "Philadelphia wants the doctor who stopped a war," she said, thinking aloud, "but they still don't want the woman who believes a person's life is worth saving, no matter who they are." Ayanch nodded. He understood completely. "And Socorro?" he asked. "Socorro," she said with a slow smile, "wants both." That evening, as the setting sun painted the desert sky in shades of orange and rose, Catherine sat on the steps of her clinic, the small stone hawk resting in her palm. She had come to this place broken and ashamed, running from a past she couldn't outrun. Now, she realized she hadn't been running from something. She had been running to this, to a place where her skills mattered more than her reputation, where her worth was measured not by the approval of a distant medical board, but by the lives she touched every day. High above, a real hawk circled on the warm evening air, its cry a wild, free sound that echoed across the vast, peaceful landscape. Catherine closed her hand around the stone carving, a silent promise to the woman who made it, and to the man who had trusted her with it. She went inside to prepare for the next day. Her work wasn't over. It had just begun. If you enjoyed this story of courage in the face of impossible odds, don't forget to like this video and hit that subscribe button. You won't want to miss what we uncover next.